I am, yeah. It looks like you kind of have it. I think that's just there. No, it's great. Somebody else. Yeah, I just needed to be back in my just but we're doing this kind of all week. Oh, I don't know. Well, yeah, I bought a townhouse, so. Did you move in yet? Not yet. The personnel that. No, I'm really at homestead right now. Oh, very soon. Last month later. In independent, some building. And, I enjoy it. Yeah. And, right now, I'm just to be. And then just living anywhere is a little more expensive than I thought it would.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Anna Hughes. For those that don't know me, I'm the chair of our Faith Life Committee, which helps organize these forums in addition to other groups like Joel's group, which meets Sunday mornings. If you ever have any questions about getting involved in a group or topics you'd like to see for future forums, you can let myself or Joel or any of other Faith Life members know. Today our presenter is Jade Miles, who is a licensed mental health therapist and will be presenting on race-based traumatic stress.
Do you want to share your screen on Zoom and everything? You already have that.
It should be set up, but let's see. We'll just double check one more time that there's no one else in the Zoom waiting room. That's always good to. Let's see. And then you want to hit share sound. Yep. And we want the application window, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. We'd had it when we had the test one open and then there we go.
Can everybody hear me okay? I have to get really close to this, I guess. All right, so as Anna had said, my name is Jade Miles. I am currently working with mostly individuals of color. I work in a private practice for mental health services, and I've been in the field for about 8 years now. So my passion for working with folks of color really came out of like the 2020s when George Floyd unfortunately lost his life. I actually started exploring my own identity a little bit more. I am biracial, so my mom is white and my dad is Black. But I didn't really have a lot of opportunity to explore my racial identity as a Black woman because I lived in a predominantly white community. So I didn't have a lot of folks that looked like me, had the same experiences as myself. And so it wasn't until 2020 that I really started to explore that part of my identity. So I always like to put a disclaimer on the information that I share because I want to recognize that a lot of people may have some of the experiences that I'm describing. But today specifically, I am talking about people of color. So I just like to let people know that even though I'm talking about people of color, it doesn't mean or discount the experiences of other marginalized groups that may have been through the same things. So I want to give just some key terms to kind of start us off with. The first one is race. So we all know on all of the forms that we typically fill out, we check 1 or 2 boxes that indicate what our race is. Race actually is a social construct that was created in the 17th century, and it was a way of essentially creating a hierarchical system for folks. So if we think about how we colonized the US, folks that initially came here were the majority. But then more folks started to come over to the States and start to create a life there. But they were kind of like the outcasts. But a lot of those individuals were also white. And so then there created this hierarchy of people that looked different, that were underprivileged and underadvantaged, in order to create a collective of individuals that made up the majority. Because again, if we think about before race was an actual thing, folks from Irish descent were actually discriminated against in the States. And it wasn't until this construct was made that they were then assumed into the white majority, and also actually lost some of their identity because they were no longer identified as Irish, they were identified as white. So usually individuals are determined by the race by a couple of different factors. Usually they're by characteristics that are easily identifiable. So skin color, the language that they speak, and physical features. So for example, I just told you all that I am biracial. However, if you were to see me out and about and in the street, I'm actually more likely to be identified as a Black woman versus somebody that's multiracial or biracial. And so usually people are using what they can see first and foremost to identify and categorize individuals. I apologize, that's kind of blurry.
Everyone see the text okay? Maybe about as best as we can. That's good. That
I was
good?
gonna say my glasses didn't even help that one.
Oh, the shade, yes. Thank you, Annie.
Oh yeah, that way back.
Oh, yes.
Alright. And then the second term that I wanted to identify and describe for everybody is racial identity. And so it's the meaning that folks are attributing to the race that they have. And so if we think about characteristics of different racial groups, or even stereotypes of certain groups, that is essentially what we think of when we talk about somebody's racial identity. Because again, race technically really doesn't have any meaning, but it's the meaning that we put onto the race that makes all the difference. And so too, if we think about racial identity development in even children, kiddos as young as 3 months old can start to distinguish who is around them and who they may identify as their parent. And so again, this is based on physical characteristics like color, different facial features, all of those different things. Additionally, by the age of 2, children will start to internalize different stereotypes and bias that is around them. So when we think about kiddos as being sponges, it's really, really true, because if kiddos are around rhetoric that is negative towards certain groups of people, those kiddos will start to express those ideas, even if they don't fully understand what they mean. All right, so I like to give a trigger warning. There's no violence or anything in this video, but it may cause a few tears.
We actually have a line that we do at our house. We practice this thing. What is it?
I'm Ariel Sky Williams. I'm 8 years old. I'm unarmed and I have nothing that will hurt you.
It's just kind of a thing we practice at our house. There are great police officers out there. There's also some police officers who are not so good.
And my fear is that you run across one of those bad ones.
For some reason, people of color have always been a target by the police.
Before they became a policeman, they were a person. And that person took all their ideas and all their thoughts and all their prejudice into their job.
Why would a police officer assume that you did something bad?
Maybe because of my skin color.
I remember being put in handcuffs for something that had nothing to do with me. I was literally walking in the mall. Cops slammed me on the ground, busted my lip, chipped my tooth. That actually made me really mad.
How about the time they pulled us over with me in the car and arrested me and left all of you guys sitting in the car, nobody knew how to drive on the side of the road because the bumper on the car was kind of hanging off?
No.
You know, we live in Puyallup. There's people that don't even have a bumper on their car.
My rear brake light wasn't working, and I got to my destination and they were working.
I was about your age, actually. They grabbed me.
Why?
I didn't know at the time. They just grabbed me. They threw me onto the police car.
I got tased that time. That time they tased me because they said I wasn't complying.
Ariel, are you okay?
What's wrong, baby? I'm okay, I'm alive, all right? Every day I get to see you, I get to do this, right? All right, come on, let's calm down, let's finish this, all right? You good? Hey, you making me cry. Come on.
You have to be careful when you're out there in this world because this world's not going to always be honest or fair to you. I know, Sean, you got a little bit lighter than the rest of them, so it's a possibility you won't get stopped.
Sound like you just pulled him over.
Okay. If you're driving, cop pulls you over.
Police gets out the car, comes to the window, tick, 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 tick. What would you do?
License and registration, please, ma'am.
Why do you think I pulled you over?
I don't know, tell me.
When a police officer says something to you, you're black. You can't be looking at them saying, oh, I don't know, why don't you tell me?
Well, I mean,
that right there is giving them the license to pull you out of your car and physically harm you because it will be done.
Don't get upset, don't get sassy. Why did you pull me over? You don't have, I know how, just follow instructions and stay calm.
Okay.
Do you think just being a police officer and pulling you over, regardless of if you feel you've done something or not, they should get your respect?
That's a tricky question.
The answer is yes.
Yes. If you gotta go to your wallet to get your ID, say, can I go reach in my back pocket to get my ID out?
You could do what I do and I show them my hands. So when they're walking up, they see I don't have anything in my hands.
I'm Ariel Sky Williams, and I have nothing that will harm you or hurt you.
And what's the next place you put your hands when you're driving or on the steering wheel with your hands out?
If at all possible, turn your phone on.
And call someone and put it on speaker.
But whatever you're doing, I want you to say what you're doing before you do it.
You don't write any statements.
Well, you have to write a statement.
You don't have to write anything. You're a minor. I'm responsible for you. No one can tell you anything else.
If it tells you to be quiet, be quiet. Do everything that you can to get back to me. I see it weighing on you, and I don't want it to weigh on you.
I'm just worried about Donovan. I'm worried about him now.
Who are you guys talking about?
My nephew and her cousin.
I don't want him to be shot. I don't want him to go to jail.
You guys, if you could say anything to police, what would you say?
Learn about people, learn about their problems.
Take some diversity training. I mean, it should be like at this point, like a monthly requirement.
You know, there's really nothing at this point that they could do that would make me feel any safer with them without them just point blank, clearing them all out and starting all over from scratch.
So don't always assume that all of them are bad.
Mm-hmm. But all you see on the news and in newspapers, and it keeps happening. It's just in a different way. It's like how people are like, you should forgive so-and-so, but they keep doing it to me. I forgave them, but they keep doing it to me. It gets harder and harder to forgive them.
Wow.
So I share that video because that is a common conversation that is often had in Black households. I actually had this conversation with my father, who is Black, and he actually was a police officer as well. So we had to have that conversation of this is how you interact with the police. This is what you need to do to make sure that you stay safe. And when we think of police officers, we don't think that we should have to say or do things in order to keep our own safety in mind because the police are supposed to be inherently safe. And so this is a reality for folks that live within marginalized bodies. My brother, who is 10 years younger than me, actually had an experience like this with officers. He was in a little bit rougher part of town. He was going to baseball practice and getting ready to drive home, and he was pulled over by an officer. The officer claimed that he didn't have a front license plate and issued him a ticket. My father, again, who was an officer, knew that all of our cars needed a front license plate. This officer didn't check to see if my brother had a front license plate, but because he presented with really curly and quite an afro at the time, an officer in our mind assumed that he may have been Black, and that's why he pulled him over. So this is a reality that happens every day to individuals that, again, just look different or have different marginalizations throughout our nation. So I'm curious for the audience, what events do you think of when someone says that they maybe have PTSD or they've gone through trauma? What do folks think of immediately?
Military, somebody behind you said.
Yeah, military, absolutely. What else?
Child abuse.
Child abuse, 100%.
Crime victims.
Yep, crime victims.
Stalkers.
Stalkers, absolutely.
Rape.
Rape, yep.
Natural disasters.
Natural disasters. So yeah, these are all big events that we can see that somebody has gone through. We hear about them on the news, we hear about them in the media. And so with PTSD, for someone to get diagnosed, they have to be involved in an event that is threatening to their life or violent in nature. And so the individual can either experience it for themselves, they can witness it happen to someone, or they can hear about an event happen to someone else, AKA it has to be like a close family member or a friend. And again, the event has to be violent in nature or life-threatening, I should say as well. And then the last piece is that individuals, again, who are either officers or EMTs, people that are repeatedly exposed to like the aftermath of a trauma. So having to go to crime scenes or getting reports of child abuse over and over again. Those individuals can also qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD. The downside to this categorization is it leaves out folks that are consistently exposed to media-related trauma. So if we think about currently what's going on in our nation, we're seeing shootings being reported, we're seeing arrests being reported. That is very, very traumatic for people to witness. But unfortunately, per how I diagnose as a mental health therapist, that would not qualify somebody for a diagnosis of PTSD. It's really unfortunate because sometimes this limits somebody being able to get the services that they are needing because without a formal diagnosis, typically we can't provide mental health services. So that creates a barrier a lot of times. So researchers have proposed to come up with a different categorization altogether, specifically what's called race-based traumatic stress. So a lot of the characteristics that you would see in PTSD would mirror this diagnosis because people start to get really hypervigilant where they don't necessarily feel safe in all spaces. They may, you may see somebody that's maybe more irritable or on edge, all of those different things we would typically see in PTSD as well. But with this in particular, with race-based traumatic stress, it wouldn't necessarily have to be violent in nature. Being pulled over by the police and having that physical reaction to that could fall within the category of race-based trauma. Being stopped by a teacher or somebody in a grocery store and you're doing absolutely nothing wrong, but now somebody has pointed you out simply based on how you look. So some symptoms So some symptoms that folks typically experience fall within a lot of different categories. So first you have the physical. So people can experience like body aches, headaches, there might be weight gain. So typically when people experience these, we obviously think of, it might be a medical condition. Let's go get checked out by the doctor. When folks do go to the doctor though, there isn't an explainable reason for why they're experiencing these things. So it could be a result of the traumas that they've been through. Additionally, we might see different behaviors from people, like increased aggression. So if we think about little kids that don't always have words for their experiences, that's where we might see somebody that is maybe more aggressive, or they don't know how to fully express their emotions and feelings in a way that is with words, and maybe they are using just aggressive behaviors. We might also see people that are more irritable, or they're prone to like just getting agitated very quickly. We also might see withdrawal and shame and guilt. So people might start to develop this feeling of like, maybe I did do something wrong. Maybe it is my fault that I keep being identified as someone who is doing something wrong. The last one on there I also put is internalized racism itself. So this is where somebody starts to have hatred towards themselves, even if they're within a marginalized group. So this could be seen as, individuals talking poorly about folks within their own group, or maybe they avoid talking to people from their own race because they have started to internalize that I myself am bad, therefore other people around me within the same race are bad as well. Intrusive thoughts can also be a part of someone's experience. So this is where people might be in different scenarios where all of a sudden they're thinking about a previous thing that may have happened. So again, if we think about folks that get pulled over by the police, an intrusive thought could be thinking about any of the many deaths that have happened by the hands of police. And as soon as that person's getting pulled over, now we've got all of the internal effects of witnessing and seeing that violence. Additionally, people may start to have relationship struggles. Maybe they are struggling with interacting with people that look different than them because now they're like, I don't know if these people are safe, because this is what I continue to see out in the world, that, hey, this group of people may be perpetrating against folks within my race, and so now I don't know that they're safe, even if they've been friends with them for years and years. Additionally, folks can experience avoidance. So this can look a lot of different ways. So it can be through like denial, like again, maybe there isn't something about my race that perpetrated this, and so, it's because I'm a bad person or I actually did something wrong. Or there may be a lot of hopelessness, like the world is never going to change, nothing is ever going to be better, and so I'm just going to avoid, I'm going to stay at home, I'm not going to go out, I'm not going to create friendships because, I don't see anything getting better. So that is a really, really quick overview of what race-based traumatic stress is and can look like. It is a really, really big topic, and I know I only had about half an hour, so that is like the quick nitty-gritty, but I also wanted to leave you all with some takeaways about how you can support individuals experiencing racial trauma. So here's a little infographic just about different things that you can do to help support folks. So the first one is being able to look for opportunities to speak and act. So really this comes with a lot of education, being able to understand where your own privilege lies, where your own oppression lies. I often like to give people this intersectionality wheel of privilege. It's a really great way to identify, what groups do you belong to? And it's not just about race. It's about socioeconomic status. It's about immigrant status. If you're neurodivergent, all of these different identities that encompass who somebody is. And so the more that we start to explore those different identities and understand where our positions of privilege and oppression are, the more likely we are able to start to have and facilitate those conversations when we maybe hear somebody that's speaking poorly about a certain group. And in addition, being able to start to call out some of maybe the negative things that you start to hear. So maybe you hear somebody say like, oh, all Black people are criminals. Well, after doing some research, you might be able to dispute that and maybe have a conversation of like, hey, actually, I don't know that that's true, and here's why. Being able to also ask folks the right questions. So instead of asking someone to explain like their entire experience with racial trauma, maybe asking them, how can I support you? Are you okay? You know, do you want to talk about it? And so not necessarily assuming that somebody's going to want to talk about it, but letting someone share their experience with you as they want to. Because unfortunately, a lot of times, folks of color end up having to teach a lot to folks. And so folks do have to take some of that initiative to do that research and also just get curious. I have friends in other marginalized communities, and oftentimes what we end up doing is we ask each other, hey, can you do some emotional labor today? And if the answer is yes, I can ask my question about their marginalized identity. If the answer is no, I respect that, and maybe I'll ask for a resource or a way to research that myself. So it's a way to honor somebody's experience and the emotional tax that living in a marginalized body creates, because it does get to be a lot, having to explain over and over again to someone how something may be a microaggression or how something may be harmful to them. The last one is also, I think, yes. So also listening to experiences of people of color. So when somebody is speaking on a situation where they have been discriminated against or oppressed, just hear it. And, you know, a lot of times maybe that defense mechanism might come in, especially if somebody is coming to you and saying, hey, actually what you said might have been harmful. Instead of trying to say, you know, it wasn't my intent, I'm so sorry, just hear them out and let them explain like, hey, I just want to give you an opportunity to help you understand why this was hurtful. And then you can move forward and do better. Because with impact versus intent, we all have the best of intentions at times. We don't want to hurt people. We don't want to impact people. And the reality is we're going to. It's part of the human condition. We all do it. So being able to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I hear you, and can you help me understand why this was so impactful? Something else you can do is potentially help them find resources with their permission. So being able to allow someone to really navigate how they want your help versus imposing your help. So that can also be great for folks that are experiencing racial trauma. So we've got about 8 minutes, so I wanted to leave some time for questions if people have it.
But do people come to you, or are people referred to you, or both?
Both. So in my previous job, I actually did a lot of different trainings on racial topics. I did a full training on race-based traumatic stress for clinicians, so people in the field of mental health. I've also done a training on racial identity development and how that develops for kids, in addition to kind of the nuance of experience within racial identity development as well. And then the practice that I work in, a lot of folks are referred to me. I do have a Psychology Today page where people can find me. Yeah.
And we can send out too if there would be people that are interested either in referrals for client or because you do presentations and consulting too.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
we can make sure when we get like the recording up online, we can make sure that information, if you're okay with it, is
absolutely.
Yes, I totally appreciate your presentation, and I'm not questioning it at all, but I've had kind of a unique experience compared to the people in this room. I grew up in the inner city area of Detroit, and I was fortunate to have Black friends. In fact, I didn't even identify them as Black, they were just friends. Unfortunately, there were times though where I was confronted by a group of Blacks. I was assaulted, I was spit on. I guess by the time I moved out of there, I know my parents' home and my grandparents' home were burned down. The famous Devil Nights before Halloween. I went on to teach, and I always included Black writers and other minority writers because I realized that what had happened to me was a result of white racism. That basically these Blacks that were assaulting me were in effect getting even for what they had experienced. And yet, this is a very difficult question then, because you're talking about trauma. I'm actually afraid to go back to my hometown. And is that race-based trauma?
Yeah.
So with race-based trauma, that wouldn't necessarily qualify. It would fall under trauma. And in order for somebody to be racially discriminated against, there has to be an oppressive system in place. So white folks can be discriminated against. They can have prejudice geared towards them. But racism itself is specific towards racially oppressed groups. So there has to be like a hierarchy or a power structure in place for racism to exist, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying. I disagree with you, but that's okay.
As an older person, it seems, you you have the possibility of being less attentive to what we might say or do that would be offensive. And I remember working with Interface Hospitality Network in this church. And we were kind of encouraged not to make people uncomfortable by asking them questions or trying to have that relationship that you're talking about. And so you walk kind of a thin line.
You really do. And I think it's dependent on the person. Some people might really be open to sharing their experiences. So myself included, I'm really open to teaching, to educating. Other people may be in spots where they're not open to that. So again, like I said before, we're going to make mistakes. And so when somebody maybe is very clear and says like, hey, like I don't actually want to talk about my experience, I think it's just about being able to respect that. And maybe even just asking like, hey, are there resources that you would recommend where I could educate myself? So it really is going to be dependent on the human at the end of the day, but there are definitely people that are willing and open to teach and help folks learn.
What I struggle with a little bit, and this is related to some recent events within our community within the last year and a half. I've read in the paper, on Facebook, some situations where people are writing hurtful things to your community. And I don't feel that way, and I feel like I am put in a box because other white privileged people have taken amongst themselves to say these things, and it becomes a big story within our local community, and then you feel like you are put as kind of the bad person, and I feel almost like I have to speak up in the comment section and things like this and apologize for people in our community that treated the Black community like that and said those hurtful things. Because otherwise I don't feel like we're ever going to heal if people don't stand up and say, we cannot, we're not this community, we can't do this.
Yeah.
You don't want to live with that.
And that's the unfortunate piece that comes with trauma. So when a traumatic event happens, typically what happens for folks is they become avoidant of certain things. They may struggle to be in certain spaces. And so it is unfortunate that maybe, for example, if we do think about like 9/11, so a lot of folks started to become afraid of Muslim individuals. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it okay, but because of that particular trauma, now people are afraid. And so it does become being able to work through that trauma in a therapeutic space. That's really important. In addition to also starting to see some of that change. So seeing people speak up, seeing people facilitate some of those hard conversations, and not always having it be on the marginalized group that has experienced that particular trauma. I think there were some hands back there, yeah.
Well, I just can say that, when I was first teaching, I had, black students in my class, etc. And one time they asked me with a survey or something, and wanted to know how many black people had police class. I couldn't even do it up. See, it had been long enough that I just connected with them. The first day I obviously noticed who was, but it was kind of interesting because I thought it was funny that they asked that anyway. But I guess they were doing something to it.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's Doug, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Your comments on even just kind of figuring out what our role, those of us that are white, kind of going back to, it's not in any way the same thing, but the question you posed earlier when thinking about various marginalized communities of checking with people like, hey, do you have the emotional bandwidth, being respectful of when people share their story? And I feel like for especially thinking about activism, how we can do our part as a primarily white congregation, recognizing that, depending on our own experiences, our own potentially identities, our own past trauma, like we're all gonna have different availability too. Like we have a lot of great people in this church that are doing very hands-on activist work. For others, it might be occasionally, commenting online. For others, it might be doing that inner work of, reading about racism, like some of the book studies we've had in the past. But I think that theme of checking in with both ourselves and others of, hey, what is my emotional bandwidth able to handle right now?
Our local situations came as a bit of a surprise because the city of Rochester is such a diverse community. I mean, we have people from all over the world that come here, all over the world, and they bring other people. So it was quite a shock to read about these situations that we had. Like, it's very disappointing, and so I was actually quite shocked when to read about the situations. You just kind of feel this.
Could you talk a little bit about how age seems to fit into this? My sense is that, when you're young, maybe you just don't have all of the respectful filters. And also sometimes as you age, you sometimes lose some of those respectful filters. And, I guess
Yeah, age plays a significant factor because, as we get older, when we're around certain experiences, certain traditions, all of those certain things, that is really all that we know. And so when we encounter things that are contrary to our previous experience, that might be likely when we make some of the mistakes. So if we have only heard certain things about certain groups our entire life, and then we happen upon somebody that's part of that group, they may completely destroy what we have understood about this group to be. And so it's really, again, getting curious and being able to hear and receive the information versus, just assuming what we know about individuals. So I always really encourage people to be in a place of curiosity more often than not, and just being able to hear people's experiences. Because there are good people and there are bad people, no matter what identity they hold. And so it's really just getting to know folks on a one-to-one level and also celebrating their specific identities.
Are there any unique therapies that you use for race-based trauma versus other trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a researcher that created an entire CBT curriculum specific to race-based traumatic stress. And so it really encompasses not only what like those emotion regulation skills, but it also encompasses people really understanding their racial experience in addition to understanding their racial identity. Because a lot of times folks don't necessarily understand that they have been through racial trauma because it is so normalized a lot of the time. So, you know, when folks are told that, hey, like, I'm pretty sure that I was discriminated against in this space, and someone is told, like, no, that didn't happen. That person made a mistake. It's no big deal. That consistently tells somebody that their experience is wrong. And so they might just completely discount the fact that they've been through repeated traumas of that nature.
So does that type of CBT, because traditional CBT has a lot to do with cognitive behavioral therapy, for those that may be unfamiliar, but it has more focus on individual thoughts, correct, and reframing those. So it sounds like this modality has more of that systemic perspective.
Yes, yep, and it's it focuses not so much on like changing the thought, because with cognitive behavioral therapy, it's about, you know, finding the positive in it essentially, which then could lead into more of that like just quote unquote letting it go or it's not a big deal. In essence, with a racial focus on CBT, it's more of that identification of like, yes, some of these racial things may happen to you throughout your community, but how do you take care of yourself and continue to move forward?
From many experiences of living, we lived 9 years in a country where we were the minority. Yeah, I would suggest that as a great way to get a different view. And one of the things that I wish so much to counter all the accounts of harm is that we would really work with children and young people on being able to account of the richness of diversity and what one gets from knowing someone of different culture or a different race that they can't get any other way. And we don't hear it in our society.
Yeah.
It's not spoken, even though we've had those experiences. And that's one thing I think we can do as Christians is when we are in those situations to give accounts. Well, I know those experiences that harm are terrible, and I'm sorry about it. But my experience has been that counterweight is needed so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually really interesting that you pose that too, because I have also been in a training where folks talk about their experiences coming from different like from different countries and different cultures, and how their identity is kind of erased. And so if we think about the richness even of like white cultural backgrounds, so people coming from Norway, Sweden, etc. There's so much rich ancestry there that unfortunately our country has kind of glossed over and doesn't highlight a lot of the time. So I've heard the experiences of folks that maybe are coming from Chile and now they're categorized as Hispanic or Latino, and they've never in their life ever identified as that. They've always been Chilean. And so that I think really highlights how that categorization loses that diversity and that richness.
Just a couple of things if I may. We have a biracial granddaughter, and from your experience growing up, because she was growing up in a white neighborhood family, what is there something we could do to open the conversation without being awkward? The other thing is when Joel mentions age, and then you mentions being discriminated against in another country. I went to school and volunteered in Del Selby area of St. Paul back in the day, and experienced reverse racism, and it astounded me. And it was elderly people. I was with my girlfriends walking down the street, and it was the elderly people sitting on the porches that were just I got the stink eye, what are you doing in this neighborhood with our people, you know? I feel I have more of a learning experience than many of my friends, just where I grew up, the high school I went to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think keeping the ability to expose your grandchildren to just different cultural experiences, making sure they have that ability to connect with folks that look like them, it really does make all the difference. A lot of the clients that I work with, I hear a lot of times, like, I sought you out because you're a Black woman, and I've never had a therapist that was a Black woman. And just to be able to sit across from somebody to say, like, hey, like, I don't fully understand your experience because I'm not you, but like, yeah, I can definitely know how impactful that experience is, because I can relate to that. And so I think just that exposure is really helpful. Because when I was little, I would spend time with my dad's family. And so just being exposed to that completely different culture was really helpful. And just being able to be surrounded by my community as a whole, I think is really important.
Do you think it's wise to try to approach the conversation with her, or to wait until she may or may not bring it up?
I think you can do a little bit of both. There are tons of great children's books out there that talk about race.
College bells.
Oh! I think you could ask, like, hey, you know, I went to a training and learned a little bit about this. You know, I would love to, if you're open to hear about your experience, if you've had any. Maybe she hasn't, because not everybody may have those experiences. But it is pretty likely, even if, you know, giving her the opportunity to just reflect on, were there some instances where it was like, oh, I just have to let that go because I don't know that anybody's going to understand.
Thank you.
So I read an article yesterday about the new letter that the president sends to all the new immigrants who are naturalized. And whereas in the past, all the presidents acknowledge the diversity that comes and the gifts that each person brings. The new letter now says, basically, you're coming our country, we want you to be like us, and that's the way to survive around here. And I just feel like it's gonna compound the pain.
Yeah. And I think that's what's really hard is, unfortunately, that type of rhetoric fuels violence. And also, like we've heard described, then it causes more violence to be reciprocated.
I just think we're fighting against the history of our country, because from even the founding of the country, and yet we don't want to acknowledge that. And so this is something that is systemic and has been for hundreds of years. And so what we're trying to do is change that. And it's really hard because I think even religion has participated in that. And I think growing up in families that still have those ideas, and we see those children in our educational system, and how do we overcome that?
It's hard. It's like you said, it's not easy. It's going to take a lot of people doing their own research, understanding their own bias, understanding how, you know, the reciprocation of violence and how it's happening both ways. And I do like to share with people, like, even though this stuff is hard, I also think about people that hold marginalized identities of all sorts. That's hard to live in, that the society that simply based on part of their identity, they're hated because of it. And they're likely not things that they can necessarily change. And so that's kind of where, you know, that camaraderie and being able to come together, like, yeah, this is really hard stuff, And it's really hard to live with these identities. And I think the more people can just embrace the complexity of it and really commit to just like that ongoing learning and knowing that it never stops, I think we can start to see more people start to harmonize, but it won't be perfect. It won't be easy either.
Well, thank you. We probably have time for about one more question and then we're at 11, so I want to be respectful of anyone who's going to that.
I agree with virtually everything you said. The real problem I have, there's been such a backlash against identity politics that we have what we have in Washington. Basically, affirmative action's out, gay rights are out, women's independence, that's out. And I really fear that could happen in Minnesota in the next election. And I think what we need to do, again, somehow, what you're talking about, to try to also recognize that white working class people have felt left behind. That's why they've turned in the direction we have. How can you form an alliance with those people and continue doing what you're doing?
I think it comes back to understanding power and privilege. So I am a Black woman. Inherently, I know that I hold a marginalized identity. I also hold a lot of privilege. I have a master's degree. I lived in a middle-class family. I lived in a two-parent home. Those are all privileges that I was afforded by no reason other than being born into the family that I was born in. And so being able to recognize that complexity and nuance, I think, is a way to help people start to relate to one another, understand one another's struggles better. And so it's not about necessarily saying like, my struggle is bigger than your struggle. It's being able to identify like, yes, all of these complex different identities are oppressed. And that's what our entire system has been created upon. That's why we have marginalization, because someone somewhere decided to categorize these different identities and say that one was better than the other. And so that's what I always encourage people to reflect on is, you know, when we start to get into the space of like, but I have this identity and I've been marginalized against, being able to keep that and say like, yep, that is part of my story, while also hearing somebody's experience with a different marginalized identity.
Well, thank you all for coming today. Thank you so much. A lot of our groups, hopefully this, especially this wheel of privilege, I think would be something, you know, for some of our groups that have done studies on racism and how we are, you know, especially as white people, how we can be continuing to reflect and learn and grow. I think that's a great resource that we can incorporate. It will be on the recording. We can try to find like if there's a PDF. Or
I can download it and send it.
Yeah,
that's perfectly.
Yep, and then we can make sure it's sent out.
Yeah, and I can include the website to that wheel because it's just a great lot of information. So
yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and stop the recording. Oh, my face is way too close to that.